Justin Wilkey. I'm an engineer here in the deck, as is my colleague Tom Carter. And we've been working on a product here in the deck that is utilizing Vue.js. And we'll obviously be telling you all about it today and are excited to do so. So with that, that is the end of our slide presentation. Yeah. So actually, I'll keep it up there for just a second. So Vue.js is space market playing here, Tom? No? Anyway, whatever. Vue.js is a so-called single-page front-end application framework in the JavaScript language. So single-page meaning once you navigate to the website, the entire application loads on that first load, and everything you need to interact with that site is there at your disposal. No more page loading or anything like that for the rest of the application. So if you're thinking about a traditional website layout where you're going from page to page, you're very much aware of the browser that you're in and that you're dependent on this browser to navigate versus like an app that you install on your phone, which is, it's all right there, very immersive. So single page applications have grown greatly in popularity over the past several years because they're much more immersive. The feedback is much more snappy, obviously, because everything is already there. So Vue.js is among many popular frameworks such as React or Angular. Polymer is a newer approach that is up and coming. We're using some here in the deck as well, so we are excited to tell you more about it. So to do that, we are going to be demoing an application that we're excited about that Tom and I built in about a day and a half or 2 days. So it's very easy to use Vue.js. We'll be showing you the application and interacting with you using it while we show you the code base and how it's actually built. So I'm going to go ahead and show you that application. It's called Characters. Is that the best name we settled on? We didn't come up with anything better. Anyway. All right, so here you go. So on the left, anybody recognize where this character comes from? Yeah, Star Wars. So we have Star Wars characters on the left, and can you guess the category of characters on the right? So more broad? Marvel. Yeah, so we got Star Wars versus Marvel. And then at the top we have an adjective, a character trait adjective with a definition under it. And we're basically, it's just straight up, which character best displays this character attribute, or this character attribute best describes this character. So with this one loose, not firmly attached or fastened in place, which would you say, which character best describes? Greedo? All right. Greedo, sorry.
Greedo is more loose than Gamora.
Awesome. Daring. Involving danger, or willing to do something that is dangerous or that involves a lot of risk. Wedge. Yeah, let's go with Wedge as well.
Wedge Antilles is more daring than Thanos.
Awesome. Diabolical. Very bad, evil, and cruel. Yeah, that's kind of a tricky one. I think I have to go with neither.
Peter Orlando come sino Groot diabolical.
Awesome. So obviously some cool voices going on here. We're using Google Chrome's built-in speech synthesis API for that. We won't get too much into that. That's just a little added fun. So I'm going to hand it over to Tom, and he's going to get us started on Vue.js proper.
Thanks, Justin. So the first thing about Vue.js is how do we want to get up and running? And very fortunately, Vue comes with a CLI. So we can run just a few commands in our terminal, and we'll have a, Vue.js has been scaffolded, ready to go within minutes. So the first thing that you would need to do is install the CLI from npm. You would want to install that as a global dependency, so that way you can run it anywhere on your system. And then with just a few little commands here, we can get a project up and running. So give me just a sec here while I get this ready. All right, so we're going to run Vue init webpack and then the name of our project. And what's going to happen is the CLI is going to generate it. Webpack rather is a template. So there are a couple of other templates you can choose from. Webpack's probably the most popular tool in the front-end community right now, so that's what we're going to use. You can also write your own template if you so desire. So let's run that real quick and see what happens. So now it's just going to walk us through some questions here, how we want to set things up, all of that fun stuff. A lot of things it's going to guess what we want, kind of based on the context, what we, the name we told it, where we are, all that kind of stuff. So we're just set the defaults for a lot of these. For your build, like it said, recommended for most users there on runtime plus compiler. That's what you're going to want. Vue router is something we'll talk about a little bit more in depth, but it's going to be the thing that allows you to create pages inside your app. So if you wanted to have your home page and then maybe / results to look at the results of the ones that we have picked, results would be a second page, and therefore we would use the Vue router to handle navigating between the two pages. ESLint is a linter for the code, our source code. Highly recommend that you use something like it. And then if you do pick it, you'll have to pick a preset here. Obviously none, you can configure it yourself. We've been using standard. We like that a lot. Once you get over to the fact that there are no semicolons, it's pretty easy. Unit tests with Karma and Mocha, that sounds good. End-to-end tests with Nightwatch. I'm going to say no for that one just because it adds a bunch of dependencies that take forever to install. In a real world app, you probably would want to do that for your end-to-end tests. So now it's just created everything for us here. And like it says, to get started, we just need to change into that directory, install the dependencies, and then run npm run dev. So I actually have one that I've already installed all the dependencies, so I won't bore you with another npm install. So we should just have to run npm run dev. And it will start the dev server up, and then open up in a browser, and there we have it. Vue.js app. Haven't written any code yet. We've got a fully working app that's been scaffolded for us. We can jump right in and start making any of the changes for our app that we need to do. Just kind of out of the CLI here, like I mentioned, Webpack was one of the templates we were using, so if anyone's ever actually used Webpack, you probably know that it's a real pain to set up and get configured if you're not like an expert. So it's really nice that it gets that set up for you. It gets Babel set up for you, so you can use all the latest and greatest ES features. Gets all your testing stuff set up like we saw, and one other thing I'll call out here is hot reloading. And if you haven't used hot reloading yet with Webpack, it will change your life. And basically what will happen is essentially as soon as you save a file, Webpack will update your browser with the latest version of that file, but it'll do it hot. So like there won't be any refresh, it won't change anything that you're working on. It will just get the latest that you just happened. It's a huge time saver. It's something that Justin and I really love. So I'm going to turn it back over here to Justin to go a little bit more up in depth about what a Vue component is, because those are going to be the building blocks that we use to create our application.
Yeah, so with Vue, your application will have kind of an entry point. That's usually the CLI will generate a main.js file for you. That's kind of where your application launches off of, as well as an index.html. So that's your kind of your main page that everything is being planted into. So you have index.html and then one div container that your Vue app will hook into, and in that container is where your entire app lives. And then your main.js will be your initial setup saying, hey, application, use Vue. Hey, use this thing called Vue router or Vue.x for my session state. You get all that initial setup. And then from there, you will have a series of what we call components. And your components are just the pieces of your website, your Vue. So maybe like your header or your main content. content and your footer, and inside of those you'll have even more components for the different sections, like your sidebar, your image component, your content component, things like that. And so each component has 3 pieces. So I'm going to have you repeat them after me. It's going to be really cool, like you're at 3rd grade again. So each component has a template, script, and style. Awesome. So they're all right there. So each component has these 3 pieces. You can see that right here with our app view. So the app view is that root component that hooks into your index HTML container. And you can see we have a template. Each template has one immediate child. They can have as many children as it wants. Here we only have a router view. We'll get into that later. Then we have our script, and that's what's going to set up the variables and data that belongs directly to our component, to only this component, so it's scoped, so to speak, to that degree. And then style is style that pertains to this component as well. So it took me, when I first was getting into Vue, and maybe if you've built a React app, you're familiar with this already, but coming from other frameworks or website building approaches, it took me a little bit to get used to having my layout definition right next to my code definition, my JavaScript, right next to my style definition with my CSS. So that was interesting, but I've grown to really like it because everything I need for this small piece of my my site or my application is all right there. It's all contained very nicely. So it's pretty cool and I like it. So Tom's going to tell us a little bit more about the template portion of the component.
Right. So as we're looking here at our app component, there's really not a whole lot exciting going on in this template. It's just got a div and a router view. Like Justin said, we'll get into the router view in a second. So let's actually look at the component that is displaying the characters side by side. So this one has a lot more going on in it. And in fact, you can see there's a lot of HTML markup in here, and there's a few things in here that aren't HTML at all, like adjective or character or transition. These are some of the things that other components or Vue.js features that, like in the case of transition, that we can leverage to do some animation. So right off the bat, you're going to want to be able to render some kind of like dynamic text in a Vue component in your template. So you know, something like you know, the adjective, for example. We pick a random adjective and then you just show it on the screen. So if you look at that guy, all we have to do that is just you know, our variable that has the string that we want to output on the screen. We just need to wrap it in double curly braces. This is the handlebars or mustache, I forget which one, kind of syntax for the templating engine here. So that will output like whatever the value of the word is. There's some other kind of flow control things that we can potentially do in a template as well, like conditionally rendering text. So if we want to render, you know, one particular piece of text, and one, if some condition is true, but a different piece of text, if a different condition is true, we can use VIF, or along with VIF, there's also VElse. So if we were to look at maybe our results here, we can see that here we're showing some icons based on who the winner was. So, you know, if we're showing the Star Wars character and the Star Wars character won, we want to show a check mark. So we have a VIF here on the result, this particular result combination. If it was Star Wars, show the check. If it was both, then we're going to show a dash, and if it was neither, then we're going to show an X. There's also the concept of a else if as well, so this can maybe also utilize that as well for the VIF. Also, what we'll look at in this component while we're here is a v-for. So if we need to iterate over a collection of things, and like in this case, we had a list item for every matchup, and we'll just use the v-for syntax here. We can loop over just like variable name in collection, just like a regular JavaScript for loop. We can also get the index here as well if we need it. That will loop over all of our stuff. If we were to take that out, for example, and that's work, and look back at our app here and go to our results, we wouldn't see anything because now we're not looping over. So just a simple v4 there gives us all of this, great scoreboard of sorts. vModel is one that we don't actually use in our app. vModel is very useful for when you have forms and you're receiving data from the end user. So Vue.js will let you do either one-way data flows or two-way data flows. So you could just bind something's value to a form field. That would be a one-way data flow. Or you can use the vModel, which anytime the form field changes its value, the property that you've assigned the vModel to will also change with the new value. So kind of like type ahead type stuff is an example that we're using in the product that we're building, where you start searching for a drug name as you type. We're looking for drugs that match what you've typed for. The last couple here are events. So if you want to add a click listener, add a form submit listener, hover, all that kind of stuff, use the @ sign. So for example here on our start over link, we're saying, when this link is clicked, run this function reset, and we wire that up by just saying click equals whatever the method that we want to run. There's some modifiers that go with these events things as well. So prevent, for example, will automatically call event.prevent default for us, so we don't have to. There's a few other things that you can, little modifiers that you can use here. I think there's like stop, some of whatever like the options off of a typical event are. Usually there's some kind of modifier for it. You can check out the Vue docs to see exactly what all of those are. And then the last thing is doing like dynamic data binding. So as you can see, like when we're passing data around, we kind of pass it directly to the component with what looks like HTML attributes. So in some cases, if we're just passing around static strings, that's no big deal. We just give it the static text, and everything works like we expect it to. But what if we have some value that we want to pass that's stored in a variable? If we were to just do that, like how we're doing class here, then it would just echo out whatever the variable's name was. So we can put a colon before the particular attributes, or in what they're really called is props in ULAN, to represent some dynamically bound data. So like in our router link here, you can see we have the colon before 2, and then we give it some object. Or if we needed to set the dynamic background style, we have the colon before our style. And then that lets us actually, whatever the result of this background style method is, will be the value that style gets there. That's a high-level overview of the different things you can do in a template. General rule of thumb is like anything you can do in HTML, you can also do in a template. And then, of course, there's the sort of the Vue add-ons like v-if, v4, so on and so forth, to really give you fine-grained control. So I'm going to turn it back over to Justin now to go over a little bit more of what some of the script component stuff is.
Awesome. Let's do a few more votes while we do that. Add this back up. Let's see what we got here. Brave. Who's more brave?
Bucky.
Bucky?
Bucky Barnes is more brave than England.
Oh, nice. What about, Brave again, that's a cool name. War Machine or Mon Mothma? You have to go
War Machine is more brave than Mon Mothma.
unlawful. Chewbacca, I mean, he's a bandit merchant.
It's more unlawful than Black Panther.
Cool. All right, so how do we bind all this data? How does that get set up? Where are these variables managed for each of these components? That happens in the script portion of our component. So you see down here below our template closing tag, we begin the script portion. You can see we're importing some helper libraries, some JSON fixtures, some other components. We'll look at those a little bit more, how they're used inside of our component. So Vue.js uses the module type system for our JavaScript application. We won't go into detail of that too much, that's more particular to JavaScript in general. But each Vue component will have an export default section that defines the default setup for each component. And there's a few top-level variables and portions of that default export that are important to a Vue component. The name is just an identifier for how the component can be identified throughout the rest of the application. You don't usually use that, but you do every once in a while. Data is probably one of the most important portions of a Vue component. So this defines the kind of the base variables that are just crucial to this component and how it is made up. So you see we have an adjective. Obviously that's important to the top portion of our web application. The selected character, which one we've clicked on, our fun voice that we are using and randomizing on each character. Then we have our Star Wars character object, our Marvel character object, and the winner that we ultimately select. So each of these, you see we have default values. So adjective, we default out to a string, and then each of these are a character. Ultimately, the child components, the character component, just expects for Star Wars and Marvel to have a name, an image URL, I believe. Maybe it, actually, I can't remember. It's really simple. But then we're able to use, so by putting these in the data return function of the component, we're telling Vue, hey, watch these properties for reactivity, so that if any of these properties change, will automatically trigger a re-render of my application, so that the change in that variable is immediately reflected in the view that we're actually interacting with. If I define a variable outside of the export, like in this area, which you can totally do, it is not set up for that reactivity. Though you could potentially put in some hooks inside of other sections, like inside your computed or elsewhere, to make it watch that in different ways. Computed, so the best way I think to describe this is, let's imagine you have a first name and a last name data property. Maybe you want to have a full name computed property, so that if either the last name or the first name changes in your template, you just want to reference full name, and it will automatically be updated as well. And that way you can use JavaScript to append those string values as opposed to trying to do that in your HTML markup. Obviously, you can get much more advanced with that. I think some of the things we do, maybe whether or not you show a label is displayed based on an error state or something like that, could be another use case. Components, so these are the child components that you want to use inside of this component. So you can see we're using a character component and an adjective component. You'll see those back up here in our template. Here's our adjective component, and we just pass a few data pieces to that component for it to use. So in this case, it's kind of a dumb component. It just knows, hey, I can have a word, and I can have, actually that's it. It just receives a word. And then it knows it takes that word and it's going to later go fetch a definition from that word using a dictionary service of sorts. And then we have our character component, and we have two of those here for our Star Wars character and our Marvel character. The cool thing about this is, you can imagine we could add 2 more character components, and now we'd be comparing 4 characters, and that reusability is something that obviously as engineers we expect to be present, but Vue definitely makes it very easy to do that. Finally, we have some methods property here on our component, and inside here it's exactly what it sounds like it would do. You can define custom methods that this component can perform, such as random voice. So when we click a character, it'll call our next function. So it's like, hey, next, which will trigger several things. Clear out my selected characters, clear out the winner, randomize my voice property, randomize my current adjective, and my Star Wars and my Marvel characters. So These are functions that pertain to this component only, so it's all kind of scoped within the behavior of this component. And obviously, as part of your design, you want to think through what's a good logical piece of behavior here that one component should be responsible for. And if you start to have a component that gets really big or complicated and hard to follow or hard to test, then that's a good sign that you have another component trying to sneak out of there. So we have character selected. So this is a click listener. So this is a function we define here. This is the logic that handles what should happen in code when we select a character. If we go back up to our template, you can see on each of these, the containers for our character object, we are defining a click listener that's bound to that character selected method and passes in the Star Wars character. Down here, of course, the character selected passes in the Marvel character. And then that way, in our function, we immediately get a character object from our HTML markup. That's the way it looks anyway, which it makes it very easy to code and to write. And then we can add it to our results, which is, we'll get into here in a second if we have time, with a Vue.js action. So this is our state management. And then here's where we're triggering our speech synthesis speak. So something interesting, this is kind of free note. If you want to reference global window functions or properties, you do have to explicitly call out window here, because if you do not, your scope, your context here is the Vue component itself. So it is important to call out window explicitly. Alrighty, what else we got here? So props, Tom mentioned that briefly. Props are a way that you can provide a way that you can pass data from a parent component down to a child. So if we look at our adjective up here, you'll notice we have this colon word, so word is a prop in this case, and the adjective, the actual adjective, is managed by our hello component. It fetches and randomizes the adjective and then passes it down as a prop or property to our adjective component. If we were to look in our adjective component, we'll see that defined right here. So you just define an array of props that this component makes available to be attributed when it's used as an HTML element. And then we have, so watch, I believe we do, where's that at, Tom? Is that in our adjective? Yeah. So watch, so we mentioned earlier, if you put any variables in the data section of your component, they are automatically set up for reactivity. But let's pretend you have another variable that's coming from somewhere else, and you want to be able to respond to changes in that variable. You can add that to your watch section. Or more likely what you have is you want to have additional side effects to changes in a particular variable. So if my word changes, not only do I want the display in my markup to change and the view to change, I also need to go do something else. In this case, I need to go fetch the definition for that word. So in this case, I'm watching changes to word, which and the change in the markup will automatically happen because we're using this syntax here, the curly brace syntax. But I also want to fetch a new definition for it so that I get the appropriate definition displayed right here. And so I'm watching changes to words so I can trigger that network request to go get that definition. And then lifecycle hooks is the only one I've covered here. So Vue provides nice lifecycle hooks, meaning your template is about to render, your template has been mounted, it's ready to be used. So your template is about to be updated. And so sometimes you might need to do something to reprocess something, recalculate before those events happen. The most popular one that we use is mounted. That's the point at which your component has been displayed in the view, everything's good to go, your data attributes are ready, and you can now maybe need to do some initial styling setup, or you need to pull off some other variables. So I think we have an example in here in our mounted of the hello. So yeah, and when our hello app mounts, remember that it's set up with empty values for all of its data attributes. Well, that would just render an empty page, an empty application, which wouldn't be very useful. So when it's mounted and ready to go for the very first time, we want to trigger our next function. so that it loads those characters and loads the adjective so that our app is ready to be used. So that is most of the main script functionality of a Vue component. There's a lot more that you can do in that. They're updating it almost every day, so it's pretty cool. So Tom's going to briefly touch on the style piece of a component.
Thank you, Justin. So as you probably saw as we were scrolling through, there is a regular style tag at the bottom of all these components where I can put the CSS from my particular component that I'm working on here. One really nice thing about Vue, because we're using Webpack, we can also, instead of just using vanilla CSS, we could use less or Sass or some kind of other preprocessor. So to do that with Vue, it's very simple. We just added a laning attribute to our style tag, and we specified less or Sass. One note, though, is that the Vue CLI does not include the loaders and compilers you need out of the box. So in this case, we said we want to use less, so we also had the additional step of installing the less compiler and the less Webpack loader. But as soon as I install those, and those are in my node modules directory, the configuration and the Webpack config that the Vue CLI generated will just see that they're there and it will start working. So there's no additional configuration that's needed beyond just installing those two modules. Another interesting thing about styles is, so like we've said, one of the names of the game here is to have small reusable components that we can nest and use to build out our site. So one thing that you might kind of be afraid of there is, what if in one of my components I define some CSS and then I nest another component where a CSS selector maybe is reused or something, like how do I keep the styles that are maybe defined in a higher level component from impacting the styles in a lower level component? And Vue handles that beautifully with scope here. So if we want these styles that we have in this style tag here only apply to our hello component, we can just add a scope attribute, and then what will happen behind the scenes is Vue will generate a data attribute that is unique for the root element of our component, and all of our styles will be scoped to that unique data attribute. So if we have, like in our character, it also has scope styles, or adjective has scope styles. So it will also get a unique data attribute for the root node of adjective. So that's a nice way to kind of keep your styles from colliding with one another, and have nice, friendly, kind of hierarchical style rules. Beyond that, there's really not a whole lot more to the style section. Obviously, anything you can do in CSS is fair game. If you're using less or Sass, anything that you do with less or Sass is fair game. It's pretty straightforward. So since that doesn't take very long, how about we run off a few more picks here? So undismayed, who are we thinking, Cyclops or Sebulba? Yeah, Cyclops
is more undismayed than Sebulba.
Dishonored.
Grand Moff Tarkin. Grand Moff Tarkin is more dishonored than War Machine.
I think we can maybe make the case for both of them. Yeah.
Both Mace Windu and Iron Man are blighted.
Courageous. I think we'll go with Cyclops again.
Cyclops is more courageous than Darth Maul.
And then last one. Emperor? I don't know. I think I'll have to go with Thor.
Thor is more audacious than Aunt Beru.
So next we'll get into the Vue router and talk about that router view and some router links. Justin?
Yeah, so the Vue router, you may remember, as part of the CLI, was one of the built-in options for do you want to use this. Almost always I would recommend that yes, you do use it. It'll just provide a lot of convenience convenience for managing the flow, the user flow from page to page in your application. So obviously, as we pointed out in the beginning, Vue is a single page framework, meaning once it's loaded, you have everything there. But it's still convenient for the user to simulate this experience of going from one room to another room or one place to another place. And so Vue Router provides an interface and some functionality to make that easy. And so in our application, you'll see that here's our kind of our landing page. And if we click See Results, you feel like you've gone to another page, but of course it was immediate because it's already loaded there in the browser. And so then we can go back to our starting page there.
Brand Tarkin.
Oh yeah, I forgot we did that.
Vision.
Nice. So I should hover listener over their name tags. But so Vue Router will simulate that paging. So notice in our browser address bar here, Vue uses this hash, uses the hash to intercept the paging and to control that. So we have # is our index, which is our hello component.
Brand Tarkin.
And if I go to the results view, we'll have # results. And so in our application, do we have a separate file for that, Tom? The routes, or is it in our main? There we go. So here we have defined the routes that Vue Router has available to it to be used throughout the rest of the application. So we just have two in this case, very simple app. We have our hello component that is mapped to the index, and then we have our results component, which is mapped to the results path. And so we give it a name, and then obviously reference the component that we are importing into the router. There's many other things you can do with this. You can have interceptors and listeners for the different for preload of the path and post-load. So before you go to the results screen, maybe we want to have a check, do we even have any results? And if we don't, maybe we want to show an error page. You don't have results, an empty state page. Or maybe we don't even want to allow them to go to that page. So a more practical use of this, like in our application that we're building here in the deck, is if you don't have a zip code or any drug prices loaded, we want to automatically kick you back to the index to search for drugs or whatnot, whatever the case may be. And similarly, you can have a post load so that maybe you're using Google Analytics, and after every page is loaded, you want to attach some analytics findings to your buttons so that you can have some callbacks and automatically some more generic callbacks for any interactions on your page would be a use case for that. And it does several other things as well. One of them, so how do we actually trigger a new page? One built-in way is to use this router link element. So this is a component that comes from Vue Router, and as you can see, specify what page or component you're going to. So this can be either the path that you want to go to, or you can, as we are in this case, you can reference it by name. And then this, so it's going to, other than that, it's going to behave much like an anchor reference, and in fact, when it's actually rendered, it is an A tag. So here's the text that is displayed on the page, see results, and then we have our dynamic reactive text there with the results length that you'll see in our app. Back here, see results, 13 current results is what we have.
Chewbacca.
Nice.
Thor.
Valorous. Let's say Thor, right?
Thor is more valorous than Chewbacca.
Chewbacca. Chewing that back in. Anyway. That's, you can also, sorry, distracting myself. The Vue Router also has a programmatic interface to it as well, so it'll have functions like push, so you're pushing a new page, and it therefore also gives you the history, so it has a history property that you can traverse back or observe the history of your router. It has a go, or I think go is still there, where it replaces the contents of the router without adding a new history entry. Things like that. And a lot of these global plugins or global variables like the router become available on the component itself, so that you'll be able to reference this, so this being the component, this $router, or in the case of the store that Tom's about to say about this $store, this $path. I think there's another one so you can reference the address bar and any query parameters in there. So pretty cool stuff. So all right, Tom's going to tell us about Vuex and state management.
So before I jump into that real quick, just one addition to what Justin was telling you about, where you mentioned the hash in the URL. Vue will also use HTML5 push state if you want to get rid of the hash, so it'll look like a full-blown URL. The reason we don't have that is we're actually hosting this in GitHub Pages, and that doesn't play very nice with GitHub Pages. But anyway, for state, so if you worked in React, there's a whole number of options for you. The most popular probably being Redux. So Vue also has a similar library called Vuex. And it's going to essentially be our state management, where we will be able to cache properties, trigger updates to those properties, and then get the values back out when we're done and looking to display them. That's not what I want. So to configure that, it's going to look very similar to the Vue router. We just need to pull in Vuex, tell Vue we want to use it, and then kind of create our store here. So at the top level, you're always going to have these four objects. A state object, that's going to be where you define your initial state for the app, any properties. If you plan on having them, you should set some initial value for them. So in our case, the only thing we really care about is the results. So that's just an empty array. And as we pick winners, we'll push an object into that array that tells us, who won, who was facing off, what the adjective was, all of that fun stuff. Getters is pretty straightforward. That's just going to be how we get data out of the store and our components. It's just an object, and key being the name. We'll see where the name comes in here in a second when we look at a component, and then it's just a function. You'll be given the state as an argument in the function, and then we just return state.results out of this. Actions are going to be triggered by a component to update the store. Mutations are going to be the thing that actually updates the store. So that kind of seems maybe confusing that those two are like the same thing. Why do we have two different things for them? And the reason being is that mutations must be synchronous. So if you need to do some async stuff, like call out to API or something to get the data that you need to make the API call in the action, because actions can be asynchronous. And then you can trigger your mutation, or commit the mutation is what we call it, with that data along with any other data that your action received. So in our case, the actions are not asynchronous. They're pretty straightforward. We're just going to get a result and then commit the add results mutation, which basically, like I said, just pushes that result object onto the array. And then reset state is just going to do the same thing, except it's going to just update our state.results to be a new empty array. We can start back over. If we look at a component here, we can see there's this section right here, this .addResult. So that's us where we're actually calling the action, and then the object that's its argument here is what will ultimately get pushed into that results array. We can wire that up by using a couple of helpers that come with Vuex, map actions and map getters. So in the case of a getter, that's going to be a computed property. And we just have to call the map getters function and pass it an array of getters that we're interested in. In this case, results is the only getter we have, so that's the only one that's in our array. We'll use the spread operator in front of that because map getters is going to return like getters.results, getters.whatever. So we can kind of unwrap that, so to speak, by using the spread operator, and then that'll allow us to just do this.results. Similarly, in methods, we can use our map actions helper. It works the same way with the spread operator. We give it an array of action names that we're interested in, and then we can do this.addResult like we saw below. We call that, like we saw, it's going to trigger a mutation with this object and add it to our array. And like we saw on our results page, we can loop over this.results and get access to everything that happened on the picking side. You can go in pretty deep with Vue.js. There's really no limit onto like what you can put into the store. You know, what kinds of data you want to keep in the store, all of that fun stuff. So like that could probably be, you know, a talk in and of itself. But to keep things simple here for the sake of time, you know, that's just where we'll leave it with state. And then I'll hand it over here back to Justin to kind of wrap things up and go over the remaining points.
So I just wanted to point out a few things that Vue itself. It's very extendable. It's not super opinionated like some other frameworks as far as how you interact with this. So there's a great community of extensions. Vue Router, Vuex are in themselves are extensions on top of core Vue, and you can write your own. So what that means is in my main.js file, I could add global functionality to the Vue framework itself that maybe will provide app-wide benefits. It's also very testable, so it has a few quirks with any UI interactions, like most libraries or apps that you build will, because of the asynchronous nature of things needing to be rendered and reloaded. So that can be tricky sometimes, but otherwise, it's just like testing any other JavaScript code that you might have tested before using any one of the popular frameworks. And then they also have, there's work undergoing right now to add to Vue itself some test utils to make it more convenient and more streamlined to test in your test suite. So that's obviously very important to us that it be testable and be able to do so in a test-driven development fashion. So other than that, I think I just want to point out we have our code base hosted on our internal enterprise Git that anybody, it's public, so any of y'all can go look at it. Tom, do you have that up here in the browser?
I don't. It's devtalk/Vue.js.
Yeah. I guess you can't pull it up here because your computer's not internal anyway. But yeah, so we have Git documented.io. We'll attach this hopefully maybe to the post on our humanity.io website. The link to the code repo. We also have it deployed. So the really cool thing about Vue.js apps, and for that matter, any single-page JavaScript app, is that you can host them online for free. So you can build apps that the whole world can access for free using things like GitHub Pages. If you haven't heard of that, check it out. So you can push your application to GitHub Pages, and now your app is. We did this, in fact, with this application. It's available to the enterprise because we push it to enterprise GitHub. We could push it to public GitHub, and the whole world could use our app, and we would not have to pay a dime for that, unless we wanted to buy a custom domain. So those are cheap. So it's pretty cool, and it's super easy to learn. Great place to start if you're interested in building a front-end application. That's it. So thank you all for coming. Enjoy the rest of your day.